This week's 1044 is brought to you by Chevron Delos 600 ADF Ultra Low Ash Diesel Engine Oil. It's time to kick some ash.
This week on the 1044, what does the rising consumer price index mean for fleets?
Hey everybody, and welcome to the 1044, a weekly webisode from the editors here at CCJ. I'm Jason Cannon, and my co-host on the other side is Matt Cole. The trucking industry so far in 2022 is seeing both the best of times and the worst of times. Freight rates are staying at high levels, but the cost of everything from fuel to maintenance to equipment are all on the rise.
In addition to part shortages driving up costs of just about everything, inflation and the consumer price index are also playing a role in price increases. We spoke with Brian Antonellis, Senior Vice President of Fleet Operations for Fleet Advantage, who talked about what the CPI is and the impact it has on fleets in various aspects of their operations.
CPI, I think that the easiest way and the way that most people understand it is it's directly tied to inflation, right? The cost of goods is going up. It's an index that they use. One of the ways to disconnect it from trucking and looking at it is it's also the index that is used for Social Security, right? So how are we going to determine how much additional payment we have to give to someone on Social Security? We're going to look at what the market's doing, how much goods are costing, and we're going to use this index to increase it. You know, they also use it in landlords, right? If they're trying to come up with a typical increase. So if you think about those sort of normal activities, your paycheck coming in being increased, sort of in line with CPI, and also landlords using it to understand how much is an acceptable rent to raise, right? In trucking, it really affects us in two ways. It affects us in interest rates and how much it's going to cost us to finance the piece of equipment. And it also affects us on long-term agreements you may have with third parties. You know, there's the full service lease approach where you can go and pay one monthly payment, and you're going to get the acquisition of the piece of equipment, and you're also going to get all those extra services you need bundled in, right? So it's your maintenance agreement, it's your PMs that need to be done, it's your repairs that need to be done. But what happens is, because these agreements typically are extended more than 1 year, right? We go into those 3, 5, 7-year agreements. They reference CPI in all of the contracts, right? So they say your increases are based on whatever the CPI index raises. And that's very important, because typically when you have inflation, you're feeling cost pressure across the board, right? Fuel's going up. Drivers' wages are being pushed up. And then when you get down to your maintenance line, you feel comfortable that, hey, I have a full service agreement, which is going to help me bridge this tough time. Well, while it may lock in some rates, there is the CPI increase that's built in, right? So you're feeling it, like I said, in drivers, you're feeling it in fuel, you're feeling it across the board. And then it really hits you when it comes down to your maintenance agreements, because if you're not careful, you could see anywhere from a 2 to 6% increase in your cost, depending on where CPI pushes, and then also, you know, what you agreed to.
Brian explains that having low inflation over the last decade or so has spoiled all of us, which has made it difficult for fleets today in adjusting to the rise of inflation.
You know, one of the challenges we're facing today is we had little or no inflation for so many years, right? There's a whole generation of fleet professionals that have come up who have never had to deal with a CPI increase, right? They've negotiated with their vendors for a long time and stayed stagnant. Now all of a sudden they're seeing a 2, 3, 4% increase in their line, and they really have to go back to the, you know, when they sign the agreement and understand what they agreed to.
Full service leasing agreements can be beneficial to fleets when the economy is strong and there's little to no inflation. But with the CPI now on the rise, Brian says those agreements could become problematic for some carriers. But before we hear more from Brian, let's hear from 1044 sponsor, Chevron Lubricants.
Protecting your diesel engine and its after-treatment system has traditionally been a double-edged sword. The same engine oil that is so essential to protecting your engine's internal parts is also responsible for 90% of the ash that is clogging up your DPF and upping your fuel and maintenance costs. Outdated industry thinking still sees a trade-off between engine and emission system protection, and Chevron was tired of it. So they spent a decade of R&D developing a no-compromise formulation. Chevron Lubricants developed a new ultra-low ash diesel engine oil that is specifically designed to combat DPF ash clogging. Delo 600 ADF with OmniMax technology cuts sulfate ash by a whopping 60%, which reduces the rate of DPF clogging and extends DPF service life by 2.5 times. And just think what you can do with all the MPGs you're going to add from cutting your number of regens. But Delo 600 ADF isn't just about after treatment. It provides complete protection, extending drain intervals by preventing oil breakdown. Before, you had to choose between protecting your engine or your after treatment system, and now you don't. 600 ADF from Delo with OmniMax technology, it's time to kick some ash.
Full service leasing agreements are a generic term that people use, right? To where you make one payment, you get the acquisition of the vehicle, and you get all those ancillary services that you're going to need, from your maintenance to your tires to, depending on how much you want to sign up for, right down to license and taxing, the whole 9 yards, right? So the challenge with these agreements is you get one number, right? So it's everything that they bake in to that one number. When you talk about what's the opposite of full service leasing, is sort of an unbundled approach, right? Where you separate your payments for the acquisition of the vehicle, the maintenance of the vehicle. One of the challenges with full service leasing is that they try to take the average maintenance cost that you see, and they're going to give you an average across the year. So on a typical Class 8 tractor, you may see 2 or 3 cents a mile for your first year or two of operation. With a full service lease, you're going to jump right into that mid-life cycle, 8 to 9 cents per mile cost, right? So it's certainly more expensive on the front end. And then how it connects to CPI is those rates are not flat, right? If CPI increases, you're certainly going to see an increase in your payment every month. And it becomes really hard to differentiate between, is it an increase because I changed out some vehicles? Is it an increase because my vehicles are aging, or my unscheduled maintenance that isn't planned into the agreement is increasing? Or is it a finance increase directly connected to CPI, right? It becomes very difficult.
Due to current conditions, Brian suggests fleets should take more of an unbundled approach to get a better view of individual costs so they know where to focus if costs are getting too high.
Previously, fleet professionals have not had to worry about this for the last 10 years, right? We've been pretty flat. And I think that we get out of the norm of challenging those agreements and looking at them annually. I mean, yes, CPI is impacting us now. People are seeing real life cost increases hit their P&L. That's what's driving questions like that. That's what's driving people to come to places like Fleet Advantage and say, hey, can you help me understand what my costs are? But really, as an industry, we should get back into the habit of annually going through these increases, understanding the individual components. What did it cost me to buy my truck? What is it costing me to maintain my truck? How much am I spending on planned and unplanned maintenance, right? And understanding it broken down into those buckets, because it's all about managing your life cycle and understanding your cost per mile as it ages through its life cycle to make sure you're running an optimum fleet. And when you have that one payment, it makes it very challenging to understand what piece of that payment is driving an increase. And some people find sort of a happy medium. We have lots of customers who go out and say, I'd like to separate my maintenance from my acquisition of the vehicle, right? So that you can take advantage of different lease structures like a fair market value lease or a track lease versus just the one offering from the third party, right? And they'll separate those, but many of them still choose to sign a maintenance agreement because now they're able to focus on that one number and it doesn't become as tough to understand.
Parts and equipment shortages are also putting many fleets in unfamiliar territory by extending their trade cycles beyond how they normally operate. Holding on to trucks longer drives up maintenance costs as trucks get more expensive to maintain with higher mileage.
And the condition we're facing now is exacerbating that, right? Because people are getting out of their life cycle norms. They typically want to run, maybe they run 4 to 6 years. Well, there's a certain assumption of what type of maintenance is going to have to be done within that life of the tractor. There's a certain assumption of heavy repairs will really be after we trade it in, right? And today that's being changed, not only from the part shortages we have, but from the production capacity that's been reduced. And people are having to extend their life cycles, and they're struggling to try to understand what the impact of that. yes, it's CPI, but it's those additional cost increases. And now you're moving into a world where you've never lived before, where transmissions are failing and where engines are failing. So you've lost control of your full service agreements with CPI. Your parts have increased, right? And if you lose your life cycle, it becomes very challenging. And what we recommend is that while all this can seem very chaotic, right? One thing the fleet professionals have going for them today is, as an industry, they do a great job collecting data, right? And we say that when you start to feel it spiraling and you start to feel like you're getting out of control and costs are increasing, you need to stop and look at what is the foundation of your fleet program. Let's go back to your life cycle. Let's go back to what your expectations are, right? You need to partner with a company or have internal capability that can be able to walk through that analysis. What is the life of your vehicle and what your expectation should be, right? So we're lucky to partner with several customers that while all this disruption is going on, we can bring them back and say, here's what you can expect over the next couple of years. And I know we can't, it's a challenge to get trucks today. We have some great relationships with OEMs, so we're still able to get some of our customers some equipment. But even though it's going to be a challenge, let's understand how this is going to impact you for the next 12, 24 months. And let's get you on the list to get some equipment ordered. And let's be able to explain to your organization, here's the cost increase, here's the disruptions that we're feeling, but here's our plan to exit this time and world, right? This will end at a certain period. While COVID may have played a position in this, I really think it was a lot of the switch to final mile and just the increased demand at the same time we had supply chain disruption. So I don't want to be doom and gloom. There's lots of challenges, but these are the times when we haven't had to reset ourselves and go back to the foundations of what our fleet programs are. But for fleet professionals who understand that and can go back to those foundations now, they'll be able to forecast the next couple of years, educate their organizations, and align on what their capital life cycle should be and what their approach on whether it's FSL or unbundled should be.
Brian says the best way for fleets to handle rising inflation and cost is to break out cost into separate buckets, and that allows them to find where gains can be made.
You got to go back to being foundational, right? I've referenced that a couple times. You need to understand the building blocks of each cost of your piece of equipment. It's great to look at all your lease agreements and go back and say, what is the finance cost? What is my maintenance cost? What is my demand maintenance cost? Right? How does that layer in with my life cycle? How far have I varied from my life cycle and what the impact of that's going to be? And I think if you separate each of these costs into individual groupings and then go back and you either partner with a company to help you do it or use your internal fleet professionals to do it, go back and try to say, where is there any efficiency that I can find? You're certainly going to have the parts price increases, but could you look at a different approach to maintenance and more a pay-as-you-go approach versus the guaranteed full service approach, right? So I think separating each of those cost items, breaking them down, and then looking at the opportunities that exist within each of those is a great opportunity to offset and mitigate some of these challenges we're facing.
That's it for this week's 1044. You can read more on ccjdigital.com, and as always, you can find the 1044 each week on CCJ's YouTube channel. And if you've got questions, comments, criticisms, or feedback, please hit us up at 1044trucking@gmail.com or give us a call at 404-491-1380. Until next week, everybody stay safe.